check in your motives. What's going on? Why are you doing this? And be okay with that.
And let me just say this as well,
Mhm.
because I think this is important. People would come to me for sponsorship or for advice and help because they knew I was a sex worker. They knew I was sex positive. They struggled with sex. They struggled with chemsex. And so the topic of conversation was often, how are we going to navigate this? Because I'm not giving it up. It's the one thing that's keeping me alive, basically. It's the only thing that, isn't a drug right now that I can use. And one of the, I don't know, I guess for years I have plenty of success and plenty of relapses behind it. So I'm not going to say it's the answer, but, it's been to explore. And I've said explore and practice, because sex without crystal meth, sex without drugs is not going to be intense.
Yeah.
Intimacy is actually going to show up. And because the brain has, I love David Fawcett says this in his book, that what meth does is it swaps out intimacy for intensity.
Mhm.
And the brain starts thinking that intensity is intimacy. And so when we get into recovery and we don't have the meth and we go looking for that intimacy, we, the brain is looking for the intensity and it's not showing up. And we're like, oh, this doesn't work for me. And that may or may not be true, but that's why I say practice. And so it's really important for people to really, especially queer men who are, we are sexual beings. And so,
Mhm.
but there is something to be said about, giving it a minute, give it a minute,
Yeah.
take a
Yeah,
second.
yeah. I was having this conversation with my partner yesterday about how he and you share a lot of the same opinions around this,
Mm,
at least the ones that
mm,
I just heard you say. And he was saying, like, we were talking about our own sex life, and we were talking about like what does sexual fluidity look like, and what does like a sex without fear look like, and what does
mm.
like sex without hangups look like, and what does sex look like when it doesn't have to feel so fraught with like all the like judgment and decisions. Like, what does sex look like then?
I just love that you guys have these intellectual conversations
Yeah.
about sex.
I absolutely want to talk about this. So don't you dare interrupt him. Keep
Yeah.
going.
So we
Because
were
this is so important,
Yeah,
please.
so we were talking about that, like we were like, we're gay men. He and I, we're in a monogamous relationship, but we've
Mm,
talked about like what would it look like if we like if we started to like reconceptualize like the structure of a relationship. And it opened up this conversation about like, oh well, what would it look like, like to face jealousy, or to like all the things that are so wrapped up in sex and sexuality, right? So you had some thoughts?
I do. Oh
Mhm.
boy, do I have thoughts.
Yeah.
Oh God. You're gonna regret you invited me to this podcast.
No,
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 this
that's
is
why we have you
so,
on. Yeah.
exactly.
so beautiful. And it's so important,
Mhm.
because I want to repeat what I heard you say, because I think it's really it's the thing that is my thing right now. It's my jam. And it's when we say, what does sex look like without the awkwardness or the insecurity? What does sex look like without the jealousy? What does our relationship look like if we are not monogamous? And so what I hear when I hear that terminology, and I don't need to be rigid about it. We don't need to be rigid about the conversation. But when we frame things in that way, we're saying, I want to remove jealousy. I want to remove awkwardness. I want to remove insecurity. I want to remove my idea of not enoughness from the sex. And I am really, I'm here to give you some bad news and some really good news. Is we don't have to remove it. We can have, I mean, at least in my opinion, my opinion, I'm so willing to be incorrect about this, is that insecurity, inadequacy, not enoughness, jealousy, our egos, our bruising, our wounds belong in the room with the sex. They belong to us. They are sacred. That's where all of the empowering information is. If everything was great and perfect all the time, the growth is not there to manifest that intensity and the intimacy of that intensity. And I'm not a doctor, but I've been doing this a really long time.